Mr. Carson, your responsibilities in this position, if confirmed, would involve, I note, readiness as well as personnel. It strikes me that in a time of essentially fixed budgets, those two responsibilities are inevitably going to come into some kind of conflict. Can we maintain the proper level of readiness, training, and deal with increasing personnel costs into the not only the immediate future but the longer term future? Aren't we heading for some real dangerous trade-offs here?
I think there are trade-offs across the budget, especially when the specter of sequestration still looms in a couple of years. But personnel, in many ways, informs the readiness questions. When you talk to the services about their readiness concerns, it's often driven by personnel. Take the Army, for example. The downsizing has created enormous turmoil. They are reconfiguring what's in the BCT. They have 50,000 unavailable soldiers who can't be deployed, 39,000 medically so, 11,000 some kind of legal process. And so the personnel churn and the lack of available people makes a unit unready. And sometimes the training issues for those same people lead to degradation of unit readiness as well.
I'm concerned that we're making decisions and doing drawdowns and force reductions based upon old news. The budget caps essentially that we're working on were put in place in 2011, pre-Syria, pre-ISIS, pre-Ukraine, pre-South China Sea. Do you think we should re-examine those decisions? It just seems like we're reducing our force structure at a time of, as Director Clapper testified, unprecedented threats and danger to this country.
I think there are great dangers on the horizon, Senator. And of course, to meet those, it's not only about the people, as important as they are, it's about having the right kind of equipment, the right kind of training. And so there are trade-offs across the budget to do that. I think the budget submitted by Secretary Carter adequately balances those, but there is no question that, for me, in the era of the all-volunteer force, the continued health of our personnel is something that I'm nothing short of obsessed about.
Often when we're talking about spending, we talk about absolute dollars, $600 billion, and of course that is a huge amount of money, and it is about half of the discretionary budget. I would point out, however, that in 1967, the defense budget constituted 8.6% of GDP. In 1985, it was 5.9%. Today it is 3.3% and falling. So as a percentage of GDP, our national defense budget has shrunk almost by 2/3 in the last 40 years at a time, again, of unprecedented threats. I just think that's information that the public should have. Mr. Weiler, to follow up on some of the other questions about the Guard and Reserve, again, we're talking about declining force levels. As I talk to Guard members and businesses in Maine, a concern is the Reserve and the Guard have become much more of an active duty force called upon repeatedly for repeated deployments, and it's making it harder to maintain the support of the employer community and the potential recruits. How do we balance that, or return to a balance where the Guard and Reserve aren't going to be called upon to such an extent that it compromises the underlying efficacy of that system?
Senator, I think, first of all, is where possible, predictability is extremely critical. Being able to offer predictability not only in the rotation, but to their employers, to the families, and so forth.
That's what I agree. That's what I'm hearing.
When I was in the Pentagon before, we were having a lot of discussions around we need to engage more with the Guard and Reserve to get them part of the total force. And now I see your point on the other side. I think, if confirmed, one of the big major issues that I would look into is how we maintain that balance while still keeping the Guard and Reserve an integral part of the total force.
Well, again, as we're declining in force levels, it seems to me inevitable that there will be greater demands on the Guard and Reserve, and perhaps the answer is everybody just needs to know what the deal is going in terms of predictability. But I am concerned that we might undermine support for the Guard and Reserve unless we can clarify exactly what the role is going to be on an ongoing basis.
And I do recognize that, Senator, and I think in particular with not only the family issues, but really involving their career employers, I think that's extremely important. And so certainly if confirmed, it would be an issue that I would be interested in working on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.